With its chiaroscuro lighting and harsh angles, American film noir is one of the most recognizable cinematic movements in the medium's history for its overt darkness. However, noir is anything but style over substance. Specifically, noir depicts city spaces, locations symbolic of post-war capitalism and the accumulation of wealth, with surrealist elements to create a nightmarish rendition of post-war society. Meaning, American film noir acts as the primary connective tissue between surrealism and anti-capitalism through its evocation of the corrupt city as a symbol for post-war consumption and economic systems, thus allowing film noir to generate its core modernist critique through cinematography alone. To illustrate how film noir connects surrealism to anti-capitalism through its cinematography to visualize the movement's modernist anti-capitalist critique, the relationship between the three concepts, those being American film noir, surrealism, and anti-capitalism, must be concretely defined. To begin, film noir and surrealism have ideological overlaps that link the two movements. For the sake of this analysis, their most significant connection is their similar ideological goals. In his novel, A Brief Introduction to American Film Noir, James Nairmore clearly defines modernist critique as being at the heart of the movement. This was due to many noir films taking inspiration / being adapted from seedy modernist detective novels at the time that were, quote, deeply critical of instrumental reason, industrial modernity, and liberal democracy. As economic power shifted westward, the leading modern writers were ambivalent about the United States. For noir directors, the modernist critique was against the immediate post-war moment, a time where domesticity and consumption mediated by a burgeoning capitalist economic system were seen as the keys to a more prosperous country. However, the noir movement saw the post-war condition not as an idyllic dream mediated by consumption, but rather a surrealist nightmare destroyed by the capitalist system represented through their modernist films that were, quote, at least an attack on Europe's bourgeois value and provisional America's fundamentalism and bigotry. Surrealism is, too, defined by anti-conformist beliefs, with traces of specifically anti-capitalist sentiments seen in some of André Breton's work. Breton, the Surrealist movement's founder, defines in his Surrealist manifesto the goal of, quote, expressing the actual functioning of one's thoughts void of control or social pressures. We begin to see the overlap between noir, anti-capitalism, and surrealism when Breton writes his own anthology of black humor, or L'Anthologie de l'Humour Noir, that included stories handpicked by Breton himself. This is significant as many of these entries decry tradition, authoritarianism, and forms of consumption. The story, While the Auto Waits by O. Henry, sees its lead tortured by her wealth.
Oh, you do not know how weary I am of it. Money, money, money. And of the men who surround me, dancing like little marionettes, all cut by the same pattern. I am sick of pleasure, of jewels, of travel, of society, of luxuries of all kinds.
Breton also specifically attacks the capitalist system by stating, quote,
once and for all I had been confirmed in my idea that nothing will be accomplished as long as certain taboos are not lifted, as long as the deadly toxins that sustain a belief more and more lazy anyway in and have not been eliminated from human blood, as well as the esprit de corps' absurd attachment to nations and races and the supreme objection that is called the power of money.
For Saran Alexandrian, a member of the movement, the true expression of one's thoughts against the social order of consumption, or rather the power of money, meant not the creation of a complete fantasy, but rather a, quote, superior reality, in which all contradictions which afflict humanity are resolved as in a dream. Truly, as it was originally defined, surrealism had beliefs in anti-conformity as expressed through the obfuscation of reality and resultant freedom of the mind from social convention, with dreamlike being one of the most common means of describing the surreal tone. However, in these films, the same affective, dreamlike nature essential to surrealism is instead depicted as an unresolved nightmare, appearing to be more closely associated with the Dada branch of surrealism that acted as an immediate precursor to the movement in the mid-1920s. According to the Salvador Dali Museum, Dadaism was infamously titled the anti-art movement for its primary goal of, quote, counterattacking everything that was conventional in society out of a disgust for the World War I period. The movement created art intended to shock and break viewers out of the ambivalence induced by a conformist wartime society, resulting in art that was darker than the more revisionist surrealist movement that spawned from Dadaism. To reflect the society fractured by war, as well as to break viewers from their social milieu, the distinct characteristic of Dada and surrealist art is that of incoherence and obscurity. Specifically, Dadaism represented the fractured nature of a capitalist society with broken apart or disjointed imagery, in order to point out their inherent absurdity and meaninglessness. Similarly, film noir uses brutal, obscured, and incoherent imagery to display the broken reality behind a Fox Dream modernist society. So much so that Raymond Board and Eddie Chaumenton described this relationship in their landmark novel A Panorama of American Film Noir, where they first coined the term American Film Noir. They state, all the components of the noir style are designed to disorient the spectator, to disappear into psychological bearings or guideposts. Just like the surrealists and Dadaists, noir directors attempted to present a world defined by, quote, incoherent brutality and the feeling of a dream through obscured and disjointed cinematography. For their shared anti-conformist beliefs and distinct effect/tone, Raymond Board and Eddie Chaumenton thus propose a noir branch of surrealism, one that links surrealism and anti-capitalism. This anti-capitalist surrealism manifests in noir cinematography by taking inspiration from surrealist revolutionary thoughts being displayed through the aesthetic of incoherence and dreams. Board and Chaumenton define films within the movement as having 5 traits that, as stated by Nairmore in Panorama's introduction, are closely associated with the surrealist movement for presenting a darkly fragmented and obscured world: oniric, strange, erotic, ambivalent, and cruel. By adopting the nonconformist beliefs against the bourgeoisie, expressed through the aforementioned darkly surreal traits, Board and Chaumenton use surrealism as a model for a branch specific to noir, one that critiques the post-war capitalist system through corrupt representations of the unreal city space as symbolic for post-war capitalism. In Force of Evil, Leo's cramped tenement building is captured with the harsh vertical lines and lighting that creates an image embodying the surreal society fractured by consumption. Similarly, the shot of a Joe Marsh entering his brother's cramped operation showcases the bizarrely overwhelming and disjointed nature of the environment, proving how social conditions dictate human behavior through visuals that can only be described as strange, cruel, and thus surreal. While displaying dark, cramped depictions of the city to showcase the suffocating nature of hyper-consumerist, capitalist, post-war America, Force of Evil also presents the alienating effect brought on by mindless consumption, which was motivated by the city. This wide shot of a lonely Marsh after he has broken ties with his employers and closest friends visually tells the story of the post-war American. As the inevitable result of a society literally constructed to be unstable yet all-controlling, the alienated consumer is forced to grasp at a sense of stability through isolating profiteering and consumption. The nightmarish, oniric darkness is thus manifested in Force of Evil's twisted depiction of an obscure New York that is surreal in its emptiness, almost as if Marsh is aimlessly wandering through his own mind. The result is a visual that demonstrates the surrealist/noir themes of how consumer society harms its own population by motivating an endless pursuit for profit that ends with alienation and isolation. Pairing imagery from noir cities alongside Max Ernst's original paintings, one of the founding Dadaists and Surrealists, further proves the visual overlaps between noir, anti-capitalism, and surrealism. Notice the fractured and disjointed nature of the imagery alongside the painting. Both utilize negative space with harshly angular lines, visualizing a fractured, overwhelming space that is disjointed in nature. The dark colors create a dreadful tone that forever taints the poisoned city with a cruel attitude. Despite the omnipresence of the city's filth with claustrophobic and cruel set design, noir characters often wander around these surreal, empty streets, sometimes completely obscured by shadow and fog. Take the lowly Chris Cross, who spends the first 17 minutes of his film wandering aimlessly, even asking for direction in a city he's been working in for the past 3 decades due to its winding, disjointed, incoherent structure and presentation. In film noir, characters navigate a truly broken, dark, confusing world that leads them to their doom at the end of a fatalistic profiteering journey, thereby visualizing the capitalist critique inherent to film noir by incorporating surrealist traits into its cinematic representation of the corrupt city. In this way, the corrupt city showcases how noir is not just informed by surrealism, but how it implements the movement to act as a connective tissue between surrealism and a more pointed anti-capitalist critique. Film noir does not just incorporate surrealist elements into its visuals by happenstance. Rather, the cinematography was planned with surrealist traits to visualize themes and affects shared between the two movements: obscurity, unease, and a contempt for their respective historical conditions. When the surrealist influence disappears, the meaning behind film noir and its iconic visuals follows, as well as the linkage between surrealism and anti-capitalism.